My name is Laura. I'm 41 years old. I live in Alpharetta, in a quiet apartment overlooking a park I rarely have time to walk through. And until 72 hours ago, I was the senior strategic liaison at Sterling Hart, the woman trusted to hold together deals worth more than most families would earn in 10 lifetimes. I did not get that job because I was loud. I got it because I was indispensable. For 16 years, I had been the person companies called when negotiations stalled, when tempers flared, when legacies were on the line. I was the one who remembered which handshake meant loyalty and which silence meant war. I did not chase credit. I did not fight for titles. I made sure things closed, quietly, permanently. That was my mistake. Because when you make yourself invisible long enough, people forget how dangerous you are. I was fired on a Tuesday morning at 9:12 a.m. in a glass-walled boardroom on the 42nd floor, while a $3 billion merger sat open on my tablet, unfinished. They said it was about company culture. Let that sink in. The room smelled like lemon polish and expensive coffee. The skyline behind me was sharp and indifferent, steel and glass cutting into a pale gray sky. 12 executives sat around a mahogany table, all of them people I had protected at one point or another. Men whose careers I had salvaged with a single late-night phone call. Women who smiled at me in elevators and never said my name in meetings. At the head of the table stood Cassidy, 24 years old, newly appointed, perfect hair, perfect teeth, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who had never earned a thing she owned. Cassidy was the vice president's daughter. Everyone knew it. No one said it out loud. She clutched a thick, spiral-bound employee handbook like a weapon, her manicured finger tapping the cover as if the rules themselves answered to her. "Evelyn," she said, drawing my name out slowly, like she was tasting it for flaws. "You're in violation of Code 4, Section B. Your attire is not aligned with the standards we are enforcing." I looked down at myself. A tailored charcoal blazer, pearl buttons, a distressed leather tote that had traveled across 3 continents and survived more boardrooms than she had birthdays. This was not about buttons. This was about dominance. I had seen it before. The way inexperienced power looks for a public sacrifice. The way insecure leaders hunt the strongest person in the room, because taking them down sends a message to everyone else. I calmly explained that I was preparing for a final negotiation with Marcus Sterling. I reminded her that the meeting was in 48 hours. I reminded her that no one else in the building understood the legacy clauses embedded in the appendix. She did not care. She wanted blood. "You need to go home," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Change. Submit a written apology to Human Resources. And until then, you are relieved of your responsibilities." The room went silent. I could feel it then. The shift. The moment when everyone chose themselves over truth. I said one word. "No." That was all it took. "You are fired," Cassidy snapped, too fast, too loud. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." I remember thinking how strange it was that I felt nothing. No anger, no fear, just a sudden icy clarity. I nodded. "Okay," I said. That was when I saw it in her eyes. Confusion, disappointment. She wanted tears. She wanted begging. She wanted me to fight. Instead, I stood up, closed my tablet, and walked out of the room. What none of them understood in that moment was this. They thought they had fired an employee. They did not realize they had just activated something far more dangerous. 10 years earlier, during a private family dinner I had never been meant to attend, I had been asked to sign a document for convenience. A contingency, a safeguard, a formality designed to protect the family behind Sterling Hart, not the company itself. I had signed it without complaint. I had kept the original. And as the elevator carried me down from the 42nd floor, my phone buzzed with the first missed call, then another, and another. 72 hours later, the same people who watched me walk out without a word would be standing in that same lobby, begging me not to destroy their family, and I would finally decide whether they deserved mercy. I married into the Sterling family when I was 29, young enough to believe that loyalty would be noticed, and foolish enough to think that effort earned belonging. They never treated me cruelly. That would have required intention. Instead, they treated me like a tool, useful, replaceable, always just outside the circle. My husband, Daniel, was the second son. Charming, ambitious in theory, perpetually between opportunities. At family gatherings, he was the one everyone joked about gently, the disappointment wrapped in affection. I was the solution to that embarrassment. From the beginning, I understood my role. I smoothed things over. I fixed problems quietly. When Daniel missed deadlines, I called favors. When his brother mishandled negotiations, I rewrote the terms overnight. When the family needed someone to just handle it, my name appeared without discussion. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. At dinners, the conversation always drifted away from me. Deals were discussed in lowered voices once I stood up to refill wine glasses. When I offered insight, it was acknowledged with polite nods, and then rephrased by someone else 5 minutes later. "You are very detail-oriented, Evelyn," my mother-in-law once said, smiling tightly. "That is a wonderful quality in support roles." Support roles? I was senior strategic liaison to the entire company, but in that house, I was still just Daniel's wife. For years, I swallowed it. I thought patience was maturity. I thought restraint was power. What I did not realize was that they were keeping score. The turning point came 10 years earlier, during a winter dinner at the old Sterling estate in Connecticut. Snow pressed against the tall windows, muffling the world outside. Inside, the men talked business while the women circulated quietly, listening without participating. That night, I was asked to stay after dessert. "Just a formality," my father-in-law said, sliding a slim folder across the table. "We need your signature to streamline some internal risk exposure." I remember the weight of the pen in my hand. The language was dense, deliberately dry. Family risk containment agreement. My name appeared once, at the bottom. "You trust us, do you not?" he asked, his tone warm, paternal. I did trust them. I signed. No one mentioned that the clause assigned me as the trigger holder. No one explained that in the event of termination tied to ethics, culture, or reputational risk, the agreement transferred personal liability from the company to the family members who had authorized the decision. I was not signing as an employee. I was signing as insurance. Years passed. Promotions came and went. I was passed over publicly, elevated privately. They needed me close but not visible, useful but not powerful. Daniel never defended me. When I asked why, he sighed and said, "You know how they are." It is not personal. It was always personal. The night before I was fired, Daniel barely looked up from his phone when I mentioned the merger. He muttered something about Cassidy being energetic and said maybe I should play along. Play along. The next morning, I was escorted out of a building I had practically lived in, and suddenly everyone remembered my number. The first call came from Daniel. He did not ask how I was. He asked what happened. Then my mother-in-law called, her voice syrupy, careful. "This must be a misunderstanding, Evelyn. Families work through things. Families." By the second day, the calls became urgent. Legal needed clarification. The partners were asking questions. The Sterling name was appearing in emails with words like exposure and disclosure attached. Cassidy did not call. She thought she was in control. I met Marcus Sterling that evening, not as a plea, but as a confirmation. He did not ask me why I had been fired. He already knew. He asked me one question instead. "Do they understand what they have done?" I told him no. That was when he smiled slowly, like a man watching a structure collapse exactly as engineered. Back at my apartment, I opened the locked drawer I had not touched in years. Inside was the original agreement, yellowed slightly, perfectly intact. I read it again, line by line, as if seeing it for the first time. Trigger clause, ethics-based termination, family-authorized enforcement, personal liability. I thought of every dinner where I had been dismissed, every meeting where my voice was repackaged, every time Daniel had told me not to make things uncomfortable. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was tight, afraid. I realized something then, standing alone in that quiet apartment. They had never protected me. They had only protected themselves. And now, they were about to learn what happens when the person holding the safety net steps away. I did not return Daniel's call. Instead, I sent one email. It was addressed to the legal department, the board, and every family member who had ever smiled at me without seeing me. The subject line was simple: clarification of termination consequences. And as I pressed send, I understood that this was no longer about revenge. This was about ending a role I had never agreed to play. The first 24 hours after my termination were quiet, in a way that felt artificial, like the stillness before a storm that everyone pretends is not coming. No public announcements, no formal press release. Sterling Hart tried to bury it as an internal personnel matter. They always did. Silence had been their favorite weapon for decades. It was mine now. By noon, the legal department realized they had a problem. The merger timeline required continuity certification. My name was on every draft, every appendix, every legacy disclosure that never made it to the shared server because it never should have. Those files were not documents. They were understandings. By mid-afternoon, emails began circulating with subject lines that grew sharper by the hour. Clarification needed. Immediate response requested. Confidential. I watched them pile up without opening a single one. At 6 p.m., Daniel showed up at my apartment unannounced. He stood in the doorway like a man who had just discovered the floor beneath him was thinner than he thought. "You should come back," he said without greeting me. "They are willing to talk." I did not invite him in. "Talk about what?" I asked. He He rubbed his face the way he always did when he was overwhelmed. Cassidy overreacted. You know how these things go. It is fixable. Fixable. I reminded him that my termination had been filed under ethics and cultural misalignment. He went still. That was not personal, he said automatically. I looked at him for a long moment. 16 years of translation sat between us. 16 years of me softening their language so he would not have to confront it. This is not about how it feels, I said. This is about what it triggers. He did not understand that word yet. The next morning, the partners called, then the investors. Then, Marcus Sterling's office requested a confirmation meeting. Sterling Hart's stock dipped before noon. Nothing dramatic, just enough to be noticed by people who watch numbers like predators watch water. At 10:37 a.m., Cassidy sent her first message. It was brief, polite, carefully worded. Evelyn, there seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding your role. We would like to clarify next steps. I did not respond. By noon, the tone shifted. We are experiencing delays tied to documentation you manage. Please advise on access. I forwarded the message to legal. With one sentence, please refer to the termination classification. That was when the building caught fire. The clause required disclosure to all counterparties within 48 hours. Ethics-based termination meant I could not be replaced quietly. It meant the risk profile of the entire deal had changed. And worse, it meant that the decision-makers were now personally exposed. Cassidy did not know that yet. The board did. At 2 p.m., I received a call from my mother-in-law. She did not mention the company. She talked about family, about loyalty, about how difficult this was for Daniel. Please do not make this harder than it needs to be, she said softly. I asked her one question. Who authorized the termination? She did not answer. By the end of the second day, Sterling Hart's legal team was no longer trying to reach me. They were trying to contain the damage. Marcus Sterling made his move that evening. Quiet, surgical, he withdrew. No press, no statements, just a formal pause tied to unresolved governance risk. The market reacted instantly. Cassidy finally called me directly at 9:14 p.m. Her voice was unsteady now. The confidence had drained out of it like air from a punctured tire. I need your help, she said. This has gone too far. I asked her if she had read the agreement. What agreement? She snapped, defensive even in fear. I told her to ask her father. There was silence. Then a whisper. What did you do? I hung up. The next morning, the family requested a meeting. All of them. They chose the old conference room, the one with the portraits on the wall. Legacy staring down at us from gilded frames. Men who had built fortunes by knowing when to cut losses and when to sacrifice someone else. Cassidy sat at the far end of the table, pale, her perfect posture cracking. Daniel would not meet my eyes. They offered me everything. A public apology, a promotion, equity, a rewritten title. They said the word misunderstanding so many times it lost meaning. I listened. Then I opened the folder I had brought with me. The original agreement. The room changed when I placed it on the table. Marcus Sterling leaned back in his chair, watching, saying nothing. I read the clause aloud, slowly, clearly. Termination for cultural or ethical reasons, authorized by family-appointed leadership, triggers personal liability transfer for all related obligations. No one interrupted me. I closed the folder. This is not a negotiation, I said. This is a consequence. Daniel finally spoke. His voice broke on my name. You could stop this. I nodded. Yes, I said. I could have stopped it before it started. I stood up. They did not follow me this time. As I walked out, I felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Relief, because for the first time, the role they had assigned me without asking was over, and what came next would be decided on my terms. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., but they arrived early. Fear does that. It makes powerful people punctual. The boardroom on the 42nd floor looked different when no one believed in it anymore. The glass walls no longer felt transparent. They felt exposed. Every reflection was a reminder of how quickly authority becomes theater, when confidence evaporates. Cassidy sat rigidly near the center, hands folded too tightly in her lap. Her white suit was immaculate, but her eyes betrayed her. She had not slept. None of them had. Daniel took the seat beside his father. He still did not look at me. Marcus Sterling arrived last. He always did. Not because he was late, but because he liked to be watched, entering rooms where decisions were already made. I stood near the wall, deliberately unseated. Cassidy began speaking before anyone asked her to. We appreciate everyone coming together on such short notice, she said, her voice pitched high, brittle. We are here to address a situation that has escalated unnecessarily. Unnecessarily, I let her talk. She blamed miscommunication, overzealous enforcement, process gaps. She used the word alignment 4 times. She never once said my name. When she finished, the silence that followed was surgical. Marcus leaned forward. Who authorized the termination? Cassidy opened her mouth, then closed it. Her father answered instead. I did. Marcus nodded slowly. Under what classification? The general counsel shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat. Ethics and cultural misalignment. Marcus turned his head slightly. Then this meeting is no longer about rehiring an employee. Cassidy stiffened. We can reinstate her immediately, she said, with full authority. Compensation adjustments. Public acknowledgement. She looked at me then, finally. Her eyes pleaded without dignity. I stepped forward. This is not a negotiation, I said calmly. This is disclosure. I placed the folder on the table. No one touched it. I opened it myself. The Family Risk Containment Agreement, I read. Executed 10 years ago. Signed by all family-appointed executives. Cassidy frowned. I have never seen that. That is because it was never meant for you, I replied. I read the clause again. Slowly. Without emphasis. Words do not need force when they are precise. As the meaning landed, the room changed temperature. The CFO exhaled sharply. Someone whispered an expletive. Daniel went pale. Marcus did not react. Cassidy's voice cracked. This is not enforceable. Marcus looked at her for the first time like she was a child holding a loaded weapon. It already is. She turned to her father. You said this was a formality. He did not answer. The general counsel finally spoke. Under the terms, the liability transfer is immediate. Counterparties have been notified. Cassidy stood up abruptly. This is insane. She set us up. I did not respond. Marcus did. No, he said. You dismissed her. The distinction mattered. Cassidy's composure collapsed. She manipulated the situation. She waited for me to make a mistake. I met her gaze. You did not make a mistake. You made a choice. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as a subordinate. Not as a threat. As a verdict. The room devolved quickly after that. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Everyone tried to position themselves away from the blast radius. Daniel finally stood. Evelyn, he said, desperation naked in his voice. Please, you can stop this. I looked at him then. Really looked. He was not asking as my husband. He was asking as a beneficiary who had finally realized the account was empty. I already did, I said softly. By leaving, Marcus pushed his chair back and stood. The sound cut through the noise. I am withdrawing permanently, he announced. Effective immediately. Cassidy screamed. The word was raw. Animal. You cannot, she said. This is our future. Marcus did not raise his voice. You ended it when you decided culture mattered more than competence. He turned to me. You have nothing further to do here. He was right. I gathered my folder and walked toward the door. Behind me, the boardroom erupted. Phones rang. Someone cursed loudly. The CFO shouted about mitigation. Cassidy sobbed, a high, humiliating sound that echoed off the glass. As the elevator doors closed, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph. Release. By the afternoon, Sterling Hart's stock had fallen sharply. Analysts spoke in careful language about governance failures and internal instability. News outlets used phrases like leadership crisis and reputational damage. Cassidy was placed on administrative leave by sunset. Daniel texted me once. I did not reply. That night, I stood in my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like distant signals I no longer needed to interpret. They had asked me what I wanted. I realized the answer had changed. I did not want justice. I wanted distance. 3 weeks after the meeting, the building on the 42nd floor no longer felt like a monument. It felt like a warning. Sterling Hart survived. Companies like that always do. They shed people, sell assets, rename divisions, and call it restructuring. On paper, the firm stabilized. In reality, the family behind it fractured beyond repair. Cassidy resigned quietly. No farewell email. No public acknowledgement. One day her office was cleared. Her nameplate removed. Her authority evaporated. She left the same way she entered. Certain she mattered. Wrong about why. Daniel moved out 2 days later. He did not fight it. He did not apologize. He packed a suitcase and said he needed time to think. That was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. The divorce was a fission. We had never truly merged our lives, only our convenience. Untangling it took less effort than staying had. People asked me if I felt vindicated. I did not. Vindication implies a hunger that needs feeding. What I felt was quieter than that. It was the absence of weight, the relief of no longer managing other people's failures like they were my responsibility. Marcus Sterling offered me a position the following week. A clean contract, clear authority, no family politics, no invisible labor. I accepted, not because I needed the job, but because it was honest. For the first time in years, my work belonged to me. My name appeared where it should. My decisions were mine alone. I did not have to soften language or absorb blame to protect fragile egos. I slept better. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the woman I had been when I signed that agreement 10 years earlier. the one who believed that loyalty earned safety, that silence built trust, that being useful was the same as being valued. I wish I could tell her what I know now. That power does not announce itself, that families built on convenience collapse under pressure, that people who benefit from your restraint will call it professionalism until the day they fear it. I did not destroy a family. I stopped holding one together at my own expense. The city looks different when you are no longer bracing for impact. The noise fades. The lights feel less urgent. You realize how much energy you spent managing rooms you were never meant to belong to. I kept one thing from that chapter of my life. Not the agreement, not the title, the clarity. If someone tells you to stay quiet for the good of the family, ask yourself whose good they mean. If someone benefits from your sacrifice without acknowledging it, believe them the first time. I walked away without looking back, and for the first time, that was not a loss. It was a choice. So tell me, if the people closest to you protected their power by stripping away your dignity, would you forgive them for the sake of peace? Or would you do what I did and finally choose yourself?